The Asia-Pacific is home to 1/4 of the world's languages, and many of them are at risk of disappearing without a trace. But an extensive digital archive developed by Australian universities is helping preserve the cultural traditions of the region. Kate Arnott reports.
This is Alamunk. 4 years ago, he was the only man left in a remote village of Papua New Guinea's Western Province who knew how to make traditional artefacts.
He demonstrated each one by one, saying how you built them, what they were used for, and very consciously, even though he couldn't read or write, never seen a computer in his life, saying he was doing this so that the next generations would know what his grandparents had passed on to him.
Professor Nicholas Evans filmed Alamunk's demonstrations in 2009, and his fieldwork forms part of an extensive digital library known as Paradisec, which stands for the Pacific and Regional Archive for Digital Sources in Endangered Cultures.
The goal of Paradisec is to create a special, enduring digital archive for the languages and cultures of our region, and that includes music, it includes storytelling, it includes a lot of things other than just language itself, which will be a secure repository that will hold things and which ultimately can be accessed by anyone.
We've got something like 7,596 hours of recordings, and they're in over 600 different languages that come from all over the Asia-Pacific region. So really it was a matter of trying to get the information together and make them accessible again, not only for researchers but also for the communities.
I'd say they're priceless, and they're unique. Often they're the only recordings ever made with a particular group of people.
The Paradisec collection is the culmination of a 10-year project between teams at the University of Sydney, the University of Melbourne and the Australian National University in Canberra. So far, they've located and digitised more than 7 terabytes of analogue tapes and other recordings, which were in danger of being lost forever, like this vision of a pig being killed in Papua New Guinea in the 1960s.
Most of these recordings are research recordings, so they were created by linguists, musicologists, anthropologists as part of the documentation of their fieldwork. There were often recordings that are unrepeatable from the 1950s and 60s, sometimes languages and musical traditions no longer performed or spoken.
These were tapes that were sitting around in people's filing cabinets or their garages when they died, and we wanted to make sure they were safe.
The tapes themselves are deteriorating, but also it's very difficult to access the material that's on there. And the big issue is that the playback machines have a limited life. We've probably, I would estimate, only got about 10 to 15 years left in which some of these tapes are going to be playable.
The digitised material can be accessed by signing up to the Paradisec site and selecting countries of interest on a map of the Asia-Pacific region. In 2005, project manager Dr. Nick Teberger's work took him to Vanuatu, where he was introduced to a local story.
Tokelau, who's the old woman in that story, was just a wonderful, she had a wonderful sense of recording customary knowledge so that other people could get access to it. And there were a few people I worked with like her. So this story of the octopus and the rat was one of the common stories that people told around the village, but she was one of the best storytellers. And so we've put that up online so people can read the story and hear her telling it.
This year, Paradisec was recognised by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, UNESCO, as part of Australia's significant documentary heritage. As well, the project team has been forging ties with institutions in the Pacific.
We've had good connections with the Institute of Papua New Guinea Studies and the Manawatu Cultural Centre and the Chibau Centre in New Caledonia. We've digitised some of their material for them. At the moment we have a funding application in to work with the Solomon Islands Museum, who have some 800 tapes sitting in Honiara and basically not doing anything.
Funding hasn't been easy to come by. There have been grants from the Australian Research Council, but nothing long-term. So to help raise money, the Paradisec team has started doing paid work for places like libraries.
For example, a missionary in Florida had worked in West Papua, and then he died and his wife sent us tapes. Now, we had no funding at all for these tapes, but they were fantastic recordings. He'd transcribed them as well. So we took images of the transcripts and put them online, and we digitised the recordings.
We stagger from deadline to deadline and improvised solution to improvised solution on that. We dream of the day when the Australian government or some other agency like that, or maybe some philanthropist, sees the deep value in what we're doing and says, look, let's put you on a longer term footing. And we want to know that in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, those things will be there, just in the same way that valuable manuscripts are in a library. That's how important these things are. In some way, the longer time passes, the more important and valuable they get.